Hello, all. Welcome to PMK Live. I'm Chris Stewart, your host for today, and our special guest, bringing him out of retirement, is Professor Clark Cole. Welcome, Mr. Cole, for coming on the show.
Okay, no problem. Day off.
So, since
Forward to it.
looking forward to it. So since some of the people that are on right now may not know who you are, can you give us a short introduction as to your history in Kempo and where you are now?
Will this 40 years or short? That's a lot of short. I started in '79 here in Southern California with Dave Rock. Went to a guy named, from there I went to a guy named Steve Spratt. Took Bronco a while. And then I hooked up with a guy named Pat Solantri. All this in Southern California. The cool thing about my start is that all of my lessons were here in Orange County. We got a lot of great martial artists, a lot of great templars there. I spent 4 or 5 years working with Pat Solantri, got promoted twice. Actually, I retested the first degree because what I had before was not worth much. Spent a lot of years training by myself, training at different studios, helping out other studios. Got my son to black belt about, I don't know, 2006 or something like that. And the fun part of that is that Chris and my son Jack got promoted on the same day. I think it was 2014.
Yep.
Yeah, 2014. Chris retested his first degree black belt. He went to the start system, which is great for me. Got me on my toes. Jack got his second that day. And, I think somebody else got promoted, but we'll talk about it. So they kind of, some of my promotions go a little too close together, I think. But then supposedly I was making it for Pat. So I've recently, this year, just retired from chasing the American Kempo ideal. And I'll work with anybody if they want help. But my allegiance is to Roger One and Chris Stewart. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm just basically working on an approach to using a knife with my 40 years of American Kempo knowledge. My instructor did the same thing. He's got his complete system. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but that's where I'm at.
So fun little journey you've been on, and looking forward to seeing where that goes as far as not only what we would call postmodern Kempo or island Kempo, but how it influences other styles such as Christian Kempo.
Yeah, postmodern Kempo came about because of a video that's on YouTube about a guy saying modern Kempo. He was the USSD guy, and he's still using all the nomenclature and all the anachronisms of the 1950s, 60s martial arts, calling it modern. He hasn't changed very much, other than what evolving along the way.
Mm.
And so I saw major differences between what people generally do, what I was shown. I'm not making a judgment on whether people are doing things right or wrong. I would like to judge the instructors for not doing anything, for doing things that are just to continue the slow slide to stupidity. But what I do, what Chris does, is was basically 1991, 1990, 91. And I just got tired of chasing that Kempo dream.
Mm.
There's better ways. There's other things to do. And please don't take offense. You hear me speak it. But it's what we do. It's how we do it. It's different from most everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong.
Exactly, and I think that's the approach that we're going to take today, as I've invited Mr. Cole to come and to finish our discussion of basically block set 1 and going from the book. As we talked about last time, I view the Infinite Insights and the Encyclopedia as basically the Bible of American Kempo. And most American Kempoists do not use it as a resource, or they may have looked at it once and not have seen some of the things that we're going to discuss today. It will make you a better instructor. It will clarify and straighten your motion. So why not use it? With that, we're going to be in Infinite Insights Book 3. Just a fair warning, this video is using the fair use laws according to national and international treaties and laws, using copyrighted material by others for use of instruction and discussion in the public arena. Legal notification over with. Let's get to the book. We're right now going to talk about the vertical outward block and some of its misnomers and misapplications. So here you see to the right of you is a page right out of book 3 showing Mr. Trail in a training horse and displaying a conceptual beginner motion of understanding the vertical outward block. With that, I will turn over for comments to Mr. Cole as to the use, the application, and the training variables in the vertical outward block.
Okay, as you see, photo 8A, the conceptual box is represented. A crouch with his foot on the black lines got in there. I don't know how you produce a dashed line, but okay, doesn't matter. The version on screen is different from the version in my book 3, which I'm also looking at. A vertical outward block is not a power block. I just wanted to say right off the bat what it's not, and then we'll talk about what it's capable of. Vertical block is a positional writing block. Now, can you turn it into a strike? Yes, you can. If you were to say, take that right hand and then cross the body over into picture, reading glasses, picture C, if you were to say, do an outward elbow strike before you did the block, yeah, it could be a strike. As I showed Chris a long time ago, we're going to use the fleshy part of the fist between the thumb and the forefinger as our contact point. But that, like the thrusting inner block, is only the contact point. That's not where we start. So we go to photo B, he's in his horse. Photo C, he cocks the fist, palm down. Photo D, he begins to move, he rotates the wrist. Photo 9A, the hand is coming up into that conceptual box. 9B is coming towards the inside the conceptual box limit. And then 9C, he stops at that line, at the shoulder. It's interesting that the only time that the horse stands, training horse is of value is when it's actually almost a complete neutral both in your eye, to your eye. You look at it. That's why we talk about perspective horse. So the vertical block rides the motion primarily. A long time ago when I was working out with Bob Harris, the vertical outward block was on the shoulder root system, which means it was very shallow. It was lower, right around the level of the pec, and it really was more of a strike than it was a block. So as we ride that motion, I want to stay away from talking about patterns because I don't want to influence one way or the other. I just want to talk about the block itself. As we ride the motion on the outside of the arm, where do we stop? We got to make sure that we stay within the tempo conundrum of block below the elbow, stop above, between the elbow and the shoulder. With a vertical outward block, it's not a power. It's not like a thrusting inward block. It basically rides, which means your body has to be turning. The representation of a horse shows only the use of the conceptual box. It does not show the application. Now you have to go down to the analytical study of the vertical outward block, which is pictures 10A, B, and C. Yeah, I also want to point out to you that you can see the profile of B and C. Trail has that left hand out as far as his right elbow. Anybody know what kind of stance, what kind of use of bow we're talking about here? Chris, you're not able to not answer. Answer is that's a rotated bow. You're going to find in the tempo system that there are a lot of gray areas when it comes to stances. But there, you have gray areas because you're doing something with your arm or your hand that asks you to do that. To twist, turn, to rear, all kinds of things. So in A, is the representation of, and let's assume he started in a natural stance, and he stepped back. Okay? And he did that block. Why? Because he picked up the attack early enough that we're assuming it is a punch or now type of attack. And so he made contact with it, and as he stepped back, he created a greater margin of error. What I call a margin of area is that you can see the margin of area in photo B, photo C, with profile. Okay, as you look at B, the left hand is out there checking for is a bracing angle. If he was in a neutral bow that was a twisted neutral bow, then that left hand would be a step. If you could be pressing, you could be pinning, it could be gravitational, it could be a lot of things depending on what you want to. But you can see that area, that square. If you took the conceptual box and you tilted it up on its edge, there you can see the conceptual box between its fist and its nose. That I call a margin of area. A margin of error is the length of your arm and your fist. Then on photo C, again, the left hand is checking at the elbow. I really can't tell with the resolution of the picture. I can't really tell when I'm looking at somebody in the row. I look for the creases of the bends of the D-pan, the lines of the D-top right around their knuckles and forearm. But I know that if he's going to have his left hand out that far, he's going to push it back. So again, you can see that margin for area, the margin of error, and we'll assume that he steps back. That's a riding motion that if you stop the block with spring, then you can return the punch, that your right hand can return with a punch or without a punch. But that means you're going to be on the outside of the attacker's palm. If you're on the inside, that left hand has a good reason for being there. Because if you just hit the heel, bend your front knee, it's going to knife you with a chop to the outside. If you look and you understand what I say when I say framing, he's got a frame that the right forearm and the left palm to the fingertip. That's his framing for the vertical habitat.
Yes, and in fact, when looking at these, for me, the first thing that popped out that he's not in a traditional neutral bow is if you look at picture 10B, his left thigh and the area around his knee is not in your traditional neutral bow position. He's rotated his hips and his shoulder at the same moment, almost as though he's in the process of going to a forward bow, but he's paused part of the way through that process. And I can see the tension in the thigh in that process. Also, you can tell in picture 10A, his left shoulder is visible, clearly visible, producing the same distance for both his right vertical outward and that left pressing check or parry.
His leg's not that thick. Nobody's leg is that thick. So yeah, he has to have moved every time you move the hip, you bring the thigh and the calf. And so that's what you're looking at. You're going to highlight and circle everything.
Mm-hmm.
Can't see it.
No. From 10C, it looks like a traditional correct neutral bow. It's just his upper half is rotated, like his lower half is rooted or stuck, and he's rotated his upper half. Now, in talk
Kindle version has a lot more detail than what just like what it says from the result.
Yeah, yeah. The Kindle version really brought out the pictures, I think, and really helped to pop them and to bring them out. But when we're talking about writing, how does this show up in self-defense techniques?
Okay, let's talk about that. The first pattern that benefits from understanding the writing motion, for me personally, is shoulder and leg. Because it's body movement, it's a body movement that solidifies or gives strength and focus to the vertical outward writing block. If we add the word writing to the block, vertical outward writing block, so we get the idea that we're going to be using that so as we repeat it or repeating it. Because the body is involved in that motion. The vertical block by itself does not do much. It creates margin of error, margin of area, but those three patterns have that aspect or that method of writing. I sent Chris a bunch of text pictures of what I've written down in my book, and the word writing does not show up until upper block, upper terrace. But I know that we were talking about upper terrace. So if a parry rides a motion, so can a block, as it says here in the book. So what was your original question?
Patterns, where does it show up? But specifically, let's compare and contrast real quick. Since we've already discussed extended outward blocks versus the traditional vertical outward block, how does the application change in our patterns?
Okay, we're working our way back from field of maze. As I step forward to the outside of the right hand punch, my hand comes up. It does not chamber to my left hip. It basically comes up from point of origin. It makes point of contact between the wrist and the elbow, but the body is turning. Now, if I were to add a cilantro footwork, my left foot would step, my right foot would step, so now my neutral bow does not face to a 30. It faces more towards a 1230 or 1. Because I know I'm not the best person in the world in the world, I'm considered a thumb. So, as I work my way backwards, I step with my hand right. So I'm pushing off my right foot, and I'm using my right hand to make contact. Then I'm rotating my upper body to the punch. There's the shield. And repeating it, I'm not going to start with a neutral bow like that. I'm just basically going to use what's called the control surface pivot point 4, which is the ball of my foot. As I get out of the way of the left hand punch, my left hand does the exact same thing. Rises from point of origin, makes contact between the wrist and the elbow. And as I get out of the way, then my right hand swings because a different method, using a different method to try to get application. Repeating them, those are moving blocks. According to 8990, those are closed hand blocks. If you do them properly, you're going to hit your right fist on your left forearm. Especially if it's this one. Yeah, exactly. The first time I did it properly, I stopped for a couple minutes and Pat said, that hurt, didn't it? It didn't hurt. I used the right spot. I hit that nerve right there. And he said, yeah, well, just about killed me with that back up. So I understand the idea that a moving block is moving not just drums, but it's the body. Mm-hmm. So you work your way back from shield and mace all the way to the first. Mm-hmm. And there are other patterns, I'm sure, that I'm not thinking about right now. But those are the three that show you have a good perspective on three ways to use that block. That's basically.
Yeah, I agree. And how then does other conceptual motions, such as anchoring, such as body fusion, help us understand both the vertical outward and this whole group of moving blocks as a whole?
Well, all of those conceptual motions are, you have to group them and then let the strike explode out of it. Anchoring, for one thing, is always about that's a margin of error. That's a margin of error. And the pattern reversing, repeat pattern reversing is as I get out of the way, my right hand takes the block, my body keeps turning, most of my weight is on my right foot. I don't push off, I just take it with it. My left hand comes underneath and in front of my right hand, the right hand, and it becomes the replacement for the right finger block. The left vertical, now the right block. And so then there's anchoring, there's margin of error, margin.
That sounds
I'd have to get up and do it in order
to to describe it. I understand, but just in this one introductory concept of motion, just in talking about the vertical outward block, so many of our concepts and principles that we learn at a later point in time get then transferred back to what we learned as a white belt. And so many times we look at, let's just say blocking set 1, as we're going to here in a little bit, so many questions are already answered in the set that you don't know the question until you're a brown belt.
Okay, I'm looking at the 9A, B, and C,
Mm-hmm.
and in my mind I'm seeing through the perspective that his right arm actually returns. He's almost in a compact unit.
Yes.
I think he is. I think he's in front of his body, and he returns it back
Mm-hmm.
to here.
Yes.
But in the new evolve, he's more here.
Mm-hmm.
That brings to mind coordination set 1 and coordination set 2. We are doing vertical outward.
Well, and as we come up to blocking set 1, we will talk about and compare and contrast doing it sitting down, either crisscross applesauce or in a chair like I'm sitting now, versus doing it in a neutral bow. But that's a little bit ahead of our discussion. Next up is, in our discussion, is the palm up and palm down blocks that we see in Long 1, displayed here in Book 3, starting with picture 13A through E.
Inside the hour, palm down.
And,
I first learned those in, I learned them to be, whereas Mr. Trejo is starting in picture 15A outside, way outside conceptual box. That's how we learned them originally. It changed a little bit, as we could say. We do them right from the hip now. Because having the, oh yeah, I have I have put marked stuff in the margin the way the package is. In 15A it says distance traveled does not equal power. And having the hand way outside the body like that, not what I should say, outside of the conceptual box body in a horse hand, doesn't add anything to the power because the arm is straight. The arm is straight on the touches. Outside of the conceptual box, the B. And I think we've learned that having an arm, as shown in the horse band, this one, the weight is losing a lot of, it's opening a window of opportunity on the horse band that unfortunately we transfer to the when you think about that turnaround from that first block, turnaround in long 4 months, triple block system, if you are going from the system, yeah, if you are in a left with the dog, facing six, in full horse and facing dog, if you keep your arm out there, then it is going within the idea of the foot. But the really should be drive that this is the punch. From the hip. So I wouldn't do what I see in 15A, B, C, and D if I'm doing the form.
I agree. I agree that it's different in the form, but not only that, it once again shows, do we have to cock to block?
Well, the quick answer is point
Exactly. Exactly.
the point of contact, the point of penetration, and maybe at the point of manipulation, but it's the block of that.
Yes. And in fact, if I step back here a little bit, the way I was shown a number of years back how to do long form 1 is when we come up into that horse stance is from that downward block, chamber 1 is to go to the point of the lower left quadrant of our conceptual box and to strike and push through to just past the center line. And then the same is true from the chambered position is to start at the end of the conceptual box and to push through.
Okay, I'll give you a little context here. In November of last year, we went to Arizona and we saw her do the kid that circle doom.
Yes.
It was where even though it was 30 years later, she still had the issue of not blocking the kid, not throwing it around because they were missing. They were missing the kick entirely, and the kick was a roundhouse kick. So when you look at that motion right there, that position, that 15A, that's exactly what we were trying to accomplish. We were trying to block hard and throw the arm over. Well, on 1, as you come from that into the block, left down the block, as you turn, you hide the left hand so that you come down the side. And that motion is teaching you how to do this delivery. It's really kind of a lot earlier than you think it is. It should be, but it takes you plenty of time to get to the practice to where you are playing and using the block in a way that's going to help you. It's amazing how something like that will be much later. But you don't use that block very well.
No, you don't, except for not only the palm up and the palm down, they do show up in our double factor motions. But if I'm chambering to the outside of my conceptual box. I've got to wait for the initial part of the double factor to get all the way across my body to then be picked up by the second part of the double factor, which nullifies the reason for a double factor in the first place. Mm-hmm.
It's a pattern. You could say that if you drop your right hand down outside your body as you sit, you've been a whole time, but in that position, that whole time, you drop your right hand down to do a minor move inside your body, well, then you're going to get it.
Mm.
And we live with that dichotomy all the time. Everywhere I go, just about everywhere I go, people are being shown to bring their right arm out before they bring their right arm into the center. So they have to block their both hands. Especially with yours, the idea of what that inside downward palm down lock does is it's position.
Mm.
And so it gives you just oh my God, he's really fast. I have my hand here. And he runs into it, he runs into the flexor part. And then I bring my hand up and I replace that motion with the power. If they make contact with my arm, with my right hand in that position, that position of block position, that's okay. But I am not going to reach out or bend over to accomplish it. I'm not going to bring my arm from 3 o'clock to my 12 o'clock to effectively try to block the kick, weaker hand.
Mm.
These are the kinds of things that you just watch. If you turn down the video on most videos of patterns, just watch. It's basically the empty space between the body and the mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, because we are asked in Kempo to bring things in within the outer rim, outer perimeter, and as we've discussed previously, inner rim, inner perimeter, in bringing those elbows in. And we're going to see this as later we discuss parries, but I need to fill the space around me properly and not to expand to the point that I'm a blimp. It's the big question is what are we filling the space with? Are we talking a liquid, a gas, or a solid, or some other state of matter? But if I am going to be doing this particular set of motions, for me, it is approaching it as though I'm going to strike from point of origin, strike, and then continue through point of contact, point of penetration at minimum, and approach it that way rather than I'm going to swing my, it's around the world type of motion.
Well, I'm going to contrast and compare here. When we say don't get in your own way, don't get God's way. So when we say don't get in your own way, the opposite of that is don't open a window of opportunity by talking to a position that nullifies your power, your focus, your accuracy. Power, focus, and accuracy. Of course, the most important is accuracy. When you look at the overhead club attack, I can't remember the name of it, where we do an X block. The left hand is in front of the right arm.
Mm-hmm.
Left arm in front of the right arm. What happens if there's too much power coming down at you, or you're a little late moving, and your left hand is behind you? Exactly. You are now getting in your own way. That's the opposite of what you see in photo 58. You're opening a window, and they're just going to get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
You're attacked.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, let's continue. Let's look at that inside downward palm up, the analytics, photos 16A through C. I find that interesting that once again, Mr. Trejo, especially in picture C, would you consider that a correct neutral bow?
Just to clarify, you said palm up, or you're talking about palm down?
Oh, well, it's 15 or 16 A, B, and C is the last little bit of analytical study of an inside downward palm down. Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting how it varies. Now, your question it's an interesting question you should ask because you have the knowledge of what's called overcorrecting for us. You also think like a mule because of that. I don't really like. I don't relish being kicked by you, especially with back there infection. That I call it an overcorrecting for because it looks like the last inflip is the depth line.
Mm.
In other words, the line that we would draw, line one, the fourth under, line one is drawn from 12 to 6, about a fifth depth. That's depending on how big your fist is. That's the definition of that. Those are the dimensions of that wolf line. If you have this,
Mm.
not like this. Like a little wider, but this is not out there. But yeah, that's an overcorrecting result as both one and Temple identify. He's a fighter. I've seen him fight. I've seen the students fight. They're pretty good. I like it.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that question is when you look at the picture, once again, looking at the creases in the gi and the position of his knee in that picture, it looks as though he's in it once again in that transition, or at least a snapshot picture of a transition from a neutral bow to a forward bow. It's just he's gone maybe a third of the distance tension wise before he fully rotates his hip and moves forward through to the forward bow.
And also look at photo B and C.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of that left hand being outward in a way, in the twisted bow, it's more of a neutral bow. Because his hand is about an inch or so past his shoulder. You can see his IKC patch.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that he's in more of a position. He's got a dimensional neutral bow that's correct for him.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I would say so. But it is. But you notice he's hitting the appropriate traditional conceptual box. If we were to superimpose the conceptual box that was seen earlier, it's quote unquote picture perfect.
Well, once you get below the midsection of your three horizontal zone, you're talking about the conceptual.
And I was hoping that question would provoke you into the conceptual rectangle, because we see that if it were me personally doing this, if we take picture B and we see the position of his right hand being even beyond his front toes, is that necessarily giving him the best margin for error and the best use of the space available?
Well, I'm looking at that as I mentally project the rectangle over his image. If you were to say, take that right arm and bring it up so it looks like an extended outward block, dimensions are correct. It should be out that far. You look at the space, the negative space, especially in the profiles of B and C. Mm-hmm. That negative space tells you how much margin of area he has to cover. He doesn't have to cover with his margin for error. Mm-hmm. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. That negative space. I'm all about the negative space, especially when I look at a FedEx comic, and I see the arrow every time. So with this is covering to. In B, it's a 16A, he's covered pretty much opposite side of his body to his left. But I think B and C teach more about how the block ends than 16A does. Mm-hmm. So that negative space is not quite angle matching. Because if he rotated his wrist, you have this up here like he does later on in the book. You've got an angle matching motion. So as that inside downward palm down block comes over and makes contact, at the point of standing, where it ends, it becomes a forearm that leads to an elbow, to a back knuckle. If you understand finger set, coordinate set, right set, can see how that one motion just basically comes out of the elbow.
Mm. Well, yes, and it that all comes from looking at the elbow as the pivot point within the universal pattern. And we can take a whole episode of us discussing for a couple of hours anchor points within the universal pattern and how that applies on the body. But let's take a look at the palm up description shown here in picture 17A through D. You got it in front of you?
I have to get the you still showing palm down on the screen. But 17A, yeah, he's in that 45 degrees for that depth force. I call it a depth force. That's the only way you can really see it. A, B, C, and D. So he's going from a chamber position, cocking it out to 3 o'clock. He's bringing it towards the center as it gets to the outside of the conceptual box, or the bottom of the conceptual rectangle. Okay? Consistent. Then he's covering, and he's breaking the threshold, and he's going to his center with his right arm in the middle of the bottom conceptual rectangle. You really have to think about what he's saying. So again, here we got cocking. Whether the palm is down or the palm is up, he's still cocking. He didn't do that. I was told.
Yeah, yeah, we were both given the choice of whether it was the tournament form or the application, and I too would prefer the application. Well, you notice there in the bottom half where it says front view, where it's square on, and picture D, he doesn't go beyond his center line.
Yeah, it's faint, but I agree with you. He's going to a, what would we say, 12:30 with the clock flat down. Yeah, so he's covering basically from about 2:30 to 12:30, going up the block.
Correct. And I think that that's important because so many times, let's go jump forward a little bit to long form 1. You see people cocking all the way from 3 and ending up all the way back over at 9, basically swinging, whether it's a baseball bat or a golf club, doesn't matter. They're swinging those blocks all the way through. And yet that's really not the point behind this motion, is it?
Well, if you look at front view photo B, I circled it not because of where it's at, but because he's got his palm down. Palm down. Well, where's the cock? I mean, there's negative space. I mean, my shoulders are cut off right about his little jump pattern. But you look at the negative space, and you're saying he's covering a lot of negative space with the palm down, because as he gets to his elbow anchored in photo C, and is now started to turn. I think it's vertical. He gets to photo B, he's rotating the wrist all the way around to affect the block. Yeah, hammer this way. So you look at negative space and you say, do we need it or do we not need it? In a horse stance, the biggest negative space is between the feet and the apex of the joint. Well, same difference in a neutral bow, but the problem with the aspect, what he's showing, I think it's for beginners. The thing is, you got a 6-piece thing at long form 1 and say, he started, okay, look at the left hand in all photos. While he's using his right hand.
Chambered. Yeah.
What the quickest point or the point of contact to go right to the left hip, to the block or the strike, whatever you want to call it. The not chamber the arm outside with the fifth cock palm down. So that's the one thing we don't get in this book is we don't get to see him doing both sides. We're inferring to say the photos are saying do this in a horse stance, come to here, then come to here. Okay. Is that how you want to do it all the time? Apparently that's the dominant thought.
Mm-hmm.
All my blood,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's an inside downward palm down or palm up, or shock.
Yes, no, I totally agree, and that will be another episode in which we talk about the nature of each of the attacks, the systematic design behind the 156, and the unique nature of each individual attack and response. But that'll be another episode. With that, and I.
Say one thing real quick.
Mhm.
I want anybody watching this to not assume that I think that what the book is wrong. I think it's an analytical study of motion, which means you have to learn to apply that motion in ways that work efficiently. So the book is right. The book, some people say the book was, the moment it came out, it was old knowledge, which I'm not sure that there's anybody saying that if he actually does things the way the book says. I don't think that they're really, I think they're just saying it to say it. But what you see in the book is correct. Adapt it, use it to fit what you need it to fit.
And in other words, the true definition of tailoring.
Yeah, so I mean, tailoring a pattern or another set. Because that's actually the only tailoring you need to know.
Mm.
Under the eye of a qualified instructor, show me your set. And if I fix your set, I fix everything else.
I agree.
Sounds arrogant, but it's true.
It's true. It has been shown true in my students over the years that you fix the sets, you fix the student. And let's look at pictures 18A through C, and he's talking about the analytical study of the inside downward palm up. Once again, the dimensions are quote unquote correct, but in picture 18A, it almost looks like Mr. Trejo's in an under correct neutral bow.
Yeah, it's the first thing I thought when I saw that. And I think because of the type of block and the method it is using, it's a little bit of both writing and striking, if you ask me. I used this sporadically in sparring, but I used it while getting out of the way of a target, up clock. And if you grasp the idea of writing and striking, then your stance does need to be a little undercorrect.
I agree.
This definitely, this is like the third version of the neutral bow in this book so far.
I. Yeah, I'm.
Now the check is at the pec. You can fully start to lose some of the kick attack, and he looks like he's sitting down. You
Hmm.
really need to settle down, and you need to manipulate your height zone in order to make both calm down and calm up real quick.
I agree. I agree, and I'm seeing that sitting down type of emotion. When you look at picture B, you look at the extra slack in the back of his gi pants. To me, that's saying he's hunkered down and he's allowing, instead of bending over to reach the target, he's manipulating his height to let it hit the target. And you notice his left shoulder isn't as rotated as we saw in the earlier. Yes, it's actually, yeah, it looks like it's higher, and you're seeing less of it than you saw in the earlier photos.
Well, no one's going to be perfect every time when it comes to these champions, but and that lack of perfection is very good in photos because it never the photo doesn't stop. It doesn't change. It is the photo.
Mm.
You're looking at the negative area, negative space between his legs, his feet, his groin, and his I'd say his forearm and his right knee. That's very much without because the elbow doesn't go any further than extension, especially with the palm up. That's angle matches the best you can get
Mm.
while using a block. If you simply rotate the wrist, which then turns the bones in the forearm.
Yes, I agree. And let's continue uh, as I skip the upward block, and we then now look at the organizational chart on parrying blocks. Um, I quoted you last time we had this. Not a problem. I'll continue talking as we continued our discussion today. Last time I talked about how Mr. Cole, my instructor, a long time ago when he first saw these charts was kind of scared by them and kind of the math or the organization that goes behind it. Now, when you look at a smaller organizational chart like this, it's not nearly as bad as later on you see with the strikes, or the categories of kicks. It just becomes a massive list of what we see. And today we're going to be talking about, in the next hour or so, position recognition, point of origin as it comes to inward, outward, downward, and upward parries, and how they are used to both accent and to implement in our patterns / techniques versus traditional blocking set one motions, such as we see with the downward, inward, palm up or palm down motion, can be instead inserted with one of these parrying motions. And Mr. Cole is still out, so we will wait for him for a moment. Oh, yum. That sounds good. Also, as a side note, a big thank you to Mr. Andy Seatherton across the pond for these shirts. Associate Master now. Yeah. Yep. Yep, our good friend from across the pond, and good to hear from him. But the shirts turned out really great and has our name on them, and I know I'll be wearing them in class coming up soon. But I was just describing for those that are watching your dauntedness in looking at the charts when you first were opening up the Infinite Insight series. Yep.
That's not charging while running it. running the phone.
Running the phone? Well, okay. Well, we will get through as much as we can, and when we stop, and we'll pick back up where we left off at a future date. But organizational chart on parrying blocks should just be.
I first saw these books in '89, a couple years after they came out, and I flipped through it and I found one of these charts and I almost threw the book in the trash. On page 108, anyways, the organizational charts are very important, but I think that they're missing something because they're in portrait rather than in landscape. You look at the chart comparing blocks, first category, hand and arm pairing, shoots out to inward, outward, downward, upward, inside, downward, palm down, outside, outside, outside. Oh, okay, inside pairing and outside pairing. Now, these charts get a little crazy. At some point, it's like standard. How many of the same thing? How many cards? Because it's only supposed to be one of these, right?
Yes.
Okay, so how many ways can you say something different but do the same thing?
Yes.
So you take this chart and you put this grain of salt like this, because it doesn't really help you. You're not. It harkens back to that anachronism of, well, I want things like this to help me, not 100 to get away, or I don't want to have such a large mental Rolodex of techniques that I have to sit there and just sit through them, figure out what I'm going to do. It's an instrument to have the chart, but don't move by it. Don't be intimidated by it either, because eventually they'll all make sense. All I have to say about that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was just sharing with the viewers about your apprehension in seeing them for the first time. But as we look at parrying blocks, and specifically here, photos 26 A, B, and C of Mr. Trejo doing an inward parry with his right hand, I find it very useful, at least for me, is it's very faint because of the way they had to do the pictures, but that A-frame or TP in the middle of the conceptual box showing the point of origin, point of contact, and then the point in which the parry stops.
Yeah, that triangle inside the box informs something that I recently developed with establishing the base. But I originally learned to do it this way. So my issue is now, 40 years later, that none of this should be done in a horse thing. The lack of power, the lack of contact manipulation that is it's a missing aspect of what the parry does in a horse dance. I'm just not interested. Then we jump, of course, to an analytical study of the parry, and we see his right hand covering to his right shoulder in exactly the same way that he was in the horse dance. Like I said, it's correct in the book. It's an oxymoron to think that your parry is going to be able to. Your parry should never put the toes off the trigger. That's just that's just not what I would do. As I shared with Chris yesterday in text messages, parrying blocks to go with force and redirect the tempted strike to the head. You can see here the same thing is going with the outward parry. Well, if you learn to do it, there's a story about somebody from a very famous karate studio here in Southern California. He learned to do a downward block, and he did it the traditional way. The arm went all the way out to the side, but he never practiced it in the back. He might have done it long form arm, might have done it, whatever, on cue. But when push came to shove, and he was fighting somebody for real, he stepped back into a horse stand and threw a downward block the way he fought. Guess what? The guy kicked him in the sternum and busted his sternum. Now that's what is that knowledge? Anecdotal knowledge. I
Mm.
actually got to fight the guy who did that at the house. He only learned to do the block from the horse stand. And when he needed it, he got his sternum up. He was out of martial arts. He was out of any sport for 12 years.
Wow. Wow.
My phone is dying. My phone is dying. So look at the horse stance for what it is in the book, and look at what it says, and then look at what it does in the parry, when they move the bow, and realize that it's still about shooting.
Yep. Alrighty. We'll catch you later, Professor Cole.